and welcome to yet another episode of On The Grid Podcast, Season 3, Episode 28 now, approaching the Episode 30 mark. These episodes are coming thick and fast. We'll probably end up reaching Episode 50 by the end of the season, who knows. But yeah, welcome to our Netherlands review and our preview ahead of Monza. I'm your host, Adrian. Joining me once again, as usual, Ethan Evans, my co-host. Ethan, how are you? A very entertaining race in Zandvoort and a lot of excitement, really. It had it all. It simply had it all.
It didn't disappoint, although we had obviously the same winner as per usual. It was a very entertaining race. And yeah, I look forward to this.
Yeah, as you, not all of you will see, but I am wearing an Netherlands top. It's not coincidental. Well, no, it is coincidental. I was just very like, I was looking in the wardrobe and I was just very like, just before we were going to record this, and I was just very like, oh, Netherlands top, let's chuck it on. Because simply it's coincidental. It's just in the spirit of last weekend's Grand Prix, which was an entertaining one, like we said. So I think let's kickstart with qualifying and looking over Q1, Q2. And Q3. So beginning with Q1, elimination, Guan Yu Zhou, Esteban Ocon, Kevin Magnussen, Valtteri Bottas, and Liam Lawson on debut, who came in for the injured Daniel Ricciardo, who's got a broken hand, bless him. Obviously, all the best in his road to recovery. We don't know whether he'll be featuring in Monza. Probably not. So we'll probably see Liam Lawson stepping in once again in his shoes. But the kind of Liam Lawson, not really surprising that he got eliminated in Q1. Obviously, his first ever qualifying session in Formula One. But yeah, it's expected to see the rookie in loose quotation marks knocked out at the first hurdle.
Yeah, like he said all weekend, this weekend was purely about getting used to the car. Because, like we said, he is probably going to be there in Monza, unless Daniel Ricciardo has a miraculous recovery, a broken hand and recovers in a week, then we're probably going to see Liam Lawson in at the next race as well. Although after that, you could possibly see him back for Singapore. That would be just under a month, so maybe that would be pushing it a little bit, but you could see Daniel Ricciardo back in the AlphaTauri for Singapore, the race after the next one. But yeah, I thought he'd done a decent job. Nothing really expected of him, but he kept pace quite well. He wasn't a million miles away at the end of the day. I think he was only sort of half a second off the next best time, which is a decent job, considering he only started driving an F1 car that day. No previous experience driving in F1. So, yeah, I think he's done a decent job.
Well, obviously, there is a little bit of previous experience. Obviously, the young drivers test after Abu Dhabi and a few FP1 sessions last season. But it's definitely not the experience of a race trim car, is it? It's a lot different. But the next talking point, really, both Alfa Romeos knocked out in Q1. Valtteri Bottas in 19th and Guan Yu Zhou in 16th. Are we surprised that gearbox is three races now deep? Are we surprised that it's kind of near the bottom end of qualifying once again?
No, like you said, I think that that car's not good enough. How many times have we said it? Especially in qualifying, they just seem to have no pace. They seem a little bit better in race trim. But yeah, qualifying for Alfa Romeo is sort of the inverse of Haas. Haas are good in qualifying, shocking in the race. It's a little bit similar to that, but obviously not hitting the heights that Haas hit in qualifying on some occasions.
Yeah, and talking about Haas, the only Haas that was knocked out in Q1 was the Haas of Kevin Magnussen. Once again, it's not a gigantic shock to see him out in Q1. His teammate Nico Hulkenberg is probably the better qualifier out of the two. So kind of seeing him out in Q1 for a numerous time this season isn't a massive shock to the system for Haas. But what is a shock is Esteban Ocon, P17 in qualifying. For Alpine, looked okay-ish in qualifying with Gasly and Ocon, but for Ocon, unfortunately, it couldn't get him out of Q1.
No, that was a surprise, wasn't it? We've spoken about how consistent Ocon is. Um, we know that Alpine is not the quickest car. It's not. It theoretically shouldn't be in the points, given that they've got 5 teams quicker than them. But for Esteban Ocon to qualify 17th, I'm not sure how much of that was down to the run plan, and obviously we saw the track evolution was incredible at Zandvoort, going from a wet to dry track. But yeah, it was shocking to see Esteban Ocon knocked out in the first stage of qualifying.
Moving on to Q2, the bottom 5 consisting of Lance Stroll, Pierre Gasly, the big hitter Lewis Hamilton, Yuki Tsunoda, and Nico Hulkenberg. Nico Hulkenberg, if you're not expecting him in Q3, Q2 is probably his limit, so it's not really a topic we need to discuss. Same with Yuki Tsunoda, who got a 3-place grid penalty, I believe, for impeding. But the big topic here in Q2, Lewis Hamilton out of qualifying. Was it a bit of a shock to the system to see Lewis only able to qualify in P13? Because with George hitting the heights of P3 and Q3, we usually see those two. It's roles reverse there this season. So to see Hamilton out in Q2 isn't part of the norm, and I don't think it needs to start being the norm, because Hamilton's a very decent qualifier this season so far.
Yeah, it is a shock, but when you actually dissect his qualifying, it's not a shock at all. He got held up by both Aston Martins in the first stage of qualifying, scraped through then, and then he was on his final lap. He went a lap earlier than everybody else, along with Charles Leclerc. He's going around the penultimate corner, which is quite a tricky corner. You have to get it spot on before you go in flat out up through the banking and run and onto the main straight. And Yuki Tsunoda decided that he was going to hog the dry line. The way that the cars were, diverting the water away, there was a clear dry line, and the rest of it was very, very wet. So Hamilton's had to go off of the dry line onto around Sonoda, back onto the dry line. Hamilton was knocked out by less than 1/10 of a second. If you're telling me that's not 1/10 of a second right there, I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, that's what was the difference at the end of the day, and rightly so. Sonoda got a grid penalty for it, but unfortunate, because I think Hamilton could have had a much better qualifying and be starting right at the front. You saw Russell put it third. I think Verstappen. I think Hamilton at the very least would have been alongside him on the second row, maybe even better. But who knows? There's no point speculating, because it didn't turn out that way. But it's just unfortunate, because he was very optimistic after the Friday practice.
Once again, a weekend of qualifying for Mercedes of ifs and buts and maybes. I think if that kind of sums up Mercedes in qualifying this season, I don't know what will. But then Gasly and Stroll, 12th and 11th. Like we say, Stroll, you're not really expecting much, are you? With him, I think it's a tough order to see him getting out of Q1 and in the Q2. It's a miracle that he managed to make it Q2 and on the brink of Q3. And with Pierre Gasly, I think Pierre will be a little bit disappointed with not qualifying in the top 10. But then again, I think qualifying on the brink of Q3, I think it's a good enough reward. But onto Q3, and you're expecting this man to be on pole, Max Verstappen, once again, a dominant qualifying. I believe it was over half a second he had the gap to Lando Norris in second place, with George Russell in third, Alex Albon a fantastic fourth, Alonso and Sainz, the two Spaniards, in fifth and sixth. Perez then came seventh. Piastri was unlucky to see all the times tumble down, and he only managed eighth, with Leclerc and Sargent crashing in Q3 to round out qualifying three in P9 and P10. Let's begin with the two kind of crashes in qualifying. Leclerc and Sargent both losing it. both kind of it was their mistake. They lost it. Well, especially with Charlotte, just kind of went on the grass, or yeah, went on the grass and just there's no stopping you from there. The grass is going to be slippery from the rain, and you're done for. And then Sargent as well. It's another error, from the American driver. But what did you think of those two pairs qualifying, Ethan? For me, from my perspective as a Leclerc fan, even before the race started, when I saw that crash, I knew that Leclerc would be going backwards. That car wasn't the same ever since that crash. We obviously will talk about the race a little bit later on, but yeah, that car went backwards, and same with Sargent. It just wasn't the same when it came to race day. But I think qualifying mistakes kind of cost them even before Sunday began.
Yeah, for Sargent, it's very unlucky. He's made his first Q3 appearance. He's done a great job, I thought, up until that point where he lost it. Just put in a great lap, actually, as well. He was second at the time. I know only 4 cars had put in a lap by that point, but he was still ahead of both Sainz and Russell, only behind his teammate, in fact. So I thought he was doing a great job on the Saturday, and then obviously, unfortunately, lost it. And for Leclerc, I think it's a little bit less forgivable because he has bucket loads of experience now under his belt. He should be maybe reading the conditions slightly better. But yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag, isn't it, really? They, for both Williams and Ferrari, they've had one driver performing well in qualifying and the other losing it and crashing. So yeah, not too sure what to make of those, particularly for Leclerc.
Let's glance over Oscar Piastri a little bit. Oscar Piastri was up in second at one point, I believe, and as the time started to tumble down, he was unable to capitalise on the track evolution and dropped down to 8th. Do you think Piastri would be a little bit disappointed knowing that he probably had the pace to be on the front row alongside Max Verstappen, but instead seeing his teammate qualifying P2 alongside Max Verstappen? Do you think the youngster, the McLaren youngster, will be a little bit disappointed with knowing that he had the pace and the car had the pace to be on the front row on Saturday? Well, on Sunday, should I say?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a weird one. He just couldn't hook up that lap at the end because, he was on at least Lando's pace throughout the entirety of qualifying up to that point for the first 2 sessions, but he just couldn't hook up that last lap in what was dry conditions, I suppose, which usually he's pretty good at in that sort of crossover period. So yeah, especially to qualify down in 8th, I think he'll be bitterly disappointed about that. He should have really been on one of those first 2 rows given his performance throughout the weekend. But yeah, I think, to be fair, the first 5 laps at Zandvoort kind of nullified any sort of advantage by qualifying well, as we saw.
And just finally, I think we touch upon the 3 amigos, the 3 best friends, should we say, the 3 F1 streamers back in COVID: Lando Norris, George Russell, Alex Albon, P2, P3, P4. It was very nice to see, obviously, a bit of a mixed up grid than the usual. Your Hamilton, your Leclerc, etc. And seeing Albon especially hit the heights of P4, very, very good. But what did you make of the 3's performance overall in qualifying? Because, like we say, Norris on pace, probably the second quickest car this weekend, especially in the dry. George Russell qualifying hasn't been his speciality in the last couple of races, but managed to get P3. And I think we'll talk about what happened in the race, but I don't think he grasped that opportunity with both hands. He obviously made a comeback, but couldn't come back enough. And then Alex Albon, the Williams man, continues to prove us wrong and to prove what that car and what the potential is in that Williams.
Yeah, well, first of all, Alex Albon, fantastic, really, wasn't it? He was unbelievable in qualifying session. You wouldn't have thought he would be that high starting on the grid. George Russell, I think he needed that qualifying session. It put him in a good position for the race, which we'll get onto later on, of course. But Lando Norris, are we that surprised that he's starting alongside the second on the front row alongside Verstappen in second? It's not his first front row start. It's not the first time he's been in the sort of top 4 or 5 in qualifying this season. He's kind of making a bit of a habit of it at this point. And yeah, no more, all power to him. He's doing a fantastic job in that McLaren, and he's hunting down the Ferraris and Russell, who aren't too far ahead of him in the championship.
Yeah, that's kind of sad. You just kind of giving me a bit of sadness with that one. But let's get on to our race review. Obviously, let's do our driver ratings as well. So let's start from the top. Max Verstappen qualifying first, finishing first. Obviously, he had a bit of trouble once the rain hit, and he stayed out a lap longer. And obviously had to make his way through the field. But once again, he did that within a matter of laps. And Perez especially, fumbling a 12-second lead over your teammate. It's ridiculous. That guy just breathes F1, Max Verstappen. And he just does a tremendous job week in, week out. So I've gone with a 10 out of 10. It's another deserved 10 out of 10 for Max Verstappen, especially in his home race as well. And when we talk about him equaling Sebastian Vettel's record of 9 consecutive wins, it's another tremendous weekend for Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I went for a 9 out of 10. I didn't think it was a perfect performance from Verstappen, but he was much quicker than Perez throughout the race. I will say I thought he was very lucky to actually be let through essentially by Red Bull. He pitted for the slicks a lap earlier than Perez, which was ridiculous. But at the same time, you expect that sort of behavior from Red Bull, not favouring Perez in favour of their golden boy. And obviously we have to congratulate Verstappen for that record equaling win in a row. However, some of the backlash we got to an Instagram reel we put out earlier in the week was a little bit funny, should I say. Some of the Verstappen fans, when we said that, it kind of feels a bit empty because he doesn't seem to care. We got a bit of a backlash to that, I got a bit of backlash to that. But I fully stand by it.
I'm not involved. I'm on the sidelines for that one. I'll just hold my hands up and just relax on the side. Why should you take the backlash?
Yeah, but you see his reaction this weekend, and he's indifferent to it. He's completely indifferent to it. And what made me laugh actually was I think somebody said, "Oh, because a Brit isn't winning, we get a bit salty." When in fact, in that actual clip, I mentioned Sebastian Vettel bowing down to the car and showing that passion, and it was great to see. Which did make me chuckle that I'm actually not referencing a Brit at all in that clip. I'm actually referencing a former Red Bull driver breaking the record at Red Bull compared to the current Red Bull driver breaking the record. So yeah, that's where I'll leave it at that. But I gave him a 9 out of 10. It wasn't the perfect performance from my point of view, but we'll settle, obviously split that in the middle for a 9.5.
Yeah, it was quite funny seeing all the. I wouldn't even say. Yeah, we'll call it backlash. Bit of clickbait, shall we say, in the media world. But the thing is, Max Verstappen just keeps on winning and winning. And of course, it's gonna be mentioned like that as if he doesn't care, because when he's talking about records, Max Verstappen, I don't think he's really bothered about records. I think he's only bothered about winning. So essentially, there's a bit of points between the Max Verstappen fans and Ethan fans. But sometimes, guys, you have to sit on the fence like me and just kind of see the wilderness come out in full flow, which I did. But moving on to Fernando Alonso, P2, started in P5, up 3 places. We talked about this in our 2023 half-term report. We've not given Alonso enough credit, especially for his podiums. And for a P2 finish, 10 out of 10 for me. Simples.
Yeah, completely agree. And probably what was the 4th quickest car this weekend. I think the McLaren and the Mercedes were definitely quicker than them, had more pace. He did capitalise, but you could also say that he just read the conditions perfectly. Pit early, went on to winters, and then sort of, whilst everybody kind of got held up by those slower cars that pit early as well, he was in a position where he could just sail through, and then they took full advantage, capitalised on Perez's error, and then held him off after the restart to claim that P2. Yeah, another 10 out of 10 performance, or should I say his first actual 10 out of 10 performance this season. As he said, I think we were a little bit too harsh at the start of the season, which we recognised during the summer break when we broke it down. But fantastic from Alonso, and back on the podium after a few races off of it, which is a little bit of a surprise. His first podium since Canada 5 races ago.
P3 man, Pierre Gasly, qualified 12th, finished 3rd. It's another 10 out of 10 for me. The whole podium for me has got a 10 out of 10 because I think they all, apart from Verstappen, I think Alonso and Gasly read the weather very, very well, which allowed them to finish up in the podium places. And yeah, Gasly making up 9 places from his starting position. It's just fantastic. And the first Alpine podium since Monaco this year, which was Esteban Ocon, and now Pierre Gasly's got himself a podium, which is very, very nice to see. So yeah, 10 out of 10 from me for Gasman. Yeah,
again, it was going to happen, wasn't it? Of course. What can you say? I think this is actually better than Ocon's podium. It's a little bit easier to overtake in Zandvoort than it is at Monaco, and as well, he had the weather conditions to cope with as well. Whereas Ocon, essentially had a pretty clear race. He just needed to put his car in the right position, and he was guaranteed that podium. But very impressive was Gasly's performance. He frustrated Sainz for a very long time, had very similar pace, kept him behind for a large chunk of the race, and then he stuck with Perez after that restart, stuck within the 5 seconds. So when he got that penalty applied, he got the podium, which was unbelievable to see. And only the second Alpine podium this season.
It's surprising to see Alpine on the podium, especially saying that they're probably in the upper midfield now, instead of battling with the big guys. Obviously Aston Martin and McLaren have broken away from the midfield ever so slightly. So Alpine is probably at the top of that list, whereas Aston Martin and McLaren are at the bottom of the top pack. But on to P4 man Sergio Perez. I've got mixed feelings with Sergio Perez this weekend. One, he couldn't hold on to a 12-second lead at the start of a race when he pitted first. Number 2, speeding in the pit lane to get yourself a 5-second time penalty. And then number 3, obviously aquaplaning off the track at turn 1, colliding with a barrier, and then going into the pit lane to give for a wet weather tire. And the pit lane closes on you. But you still get the positions back from a lap before because the session got red flagged. Many things happened with Sergio Perez this last weekend. So I only gave him an 8 out of 10. I think it's good. It's an improvement on what we've had previously. But yet again, with the advantage that he had over Verstappen, I think you should be getting a P2 or a P3, regardless of what happens. It should be clear as day. You should be on the podium no matter what, because of the advantage that you got given at the start of a race from your team, and he just didn't take it with both hands. It was right there in his hands, and he just kind of butterfingers and out she went. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for me.
I've actually agreed with you with an 8 out of 10, but for very different reasoning. I thought, he gambled on lap 1 and he took the lead deservedly so, I think. He rolled the dice, took the risk and got the rewards for it. On another day, it could have backfired and he could have been towards the back and had to pit again for 6 a couple of laps later because it hadn't got as wet as they thought. And I thought he was very unlucky to lose the lead. Obviously, Verstappen was closing at a rate of knots, but he was very, very unlucky to lose the lead, in my opinion, because he was first. He should have got the preferential treatment. He should have got the decision whether he wants to pit. But as I said a minute ago, Red Bull wanted to favour their golden boy. It's his record-breaking weekend. They were never going to stand in the way. They wanted Perez to lose the lead. As soon as he took the lead, they wanted Verstappen to get the lead back. And he was pretty comfortably in P2 until He aquaplaned off, which I don't know how much at fault he was, to be honest. I think it was one of those things that just could have happened, but he done well to actually avoid the barrier and stay in the race, essentially. The penalty obviously cost him the podium, but despite a P4 finish, if we compare it to, say, I've got the results up here, when he finished fourth in Spain, we gave him a 5 out of 10. This is a very different P4, in my opinion. I thought he did perform very well. Obviously, his qualifying still needs work, but we know that. But I thought it was a very good performance, so I've given him an 8 out of 10 as well, but for very, very different reasoning.
On to P5 man Carlos Sainz, the kind of the leading light for Ferrari so far this season, as Leclerc's woes continue. I don't know whether I've gone just super nice on Sainz because he was just carrying Ferrari to a decent points finish. I don't know whether it's me being a biased Ferrari fan either. But you might have to humble me when you give me your rating. I've given him a 9. For a few reasonings. There's obviously the first reasoning is when he went on to I believe it was his second set of softs. He gambled. He went a couple of laps earlier. And he obviously is running in the podium places. But Alonso and Gasly overtook shortly after, which was quite annoying to see. But I just think that it's this 9 out of 10 just shows the consistency that he's had so far this season. I know Charles obviously retired and didn't bring back any points for Ferrari, but I think with Carlos, you're getting eights, you're getting 7, 8s, 9 out of 10 performances week in, week out. I don't think you've seen. I think probably 1 or 2 races you've seen Carlos kind of fumble and kind of have some woes. But yeah, for me, 9 out of 10. From the reaction that I got from you, you're probably going to humble me here, give him like a 6 or something.
Now, I'll just preface this by saying I do like Carlos Sainz. I think he's a fantastic driver and very underrated, particularly by a lot of the Ferrari fan base. I gave him a 7 though, because I think it was another typical Sainz performance this season where he was very, very solid, but he wasn't spectacular. Like you said, he did pit a couple of laps earlier and got the jump on Alonso, who had that poor stop, and Gasly. But for about 20 to 30 laps before that, he was on the back of Gasly on his gearbox, but just couldn't overtake him. He needed to make that move in what is a much quicker car, to be fair. And his first podium of the season was there for the taking. If he had made that move and made it stick, then he would have been in fourth. And then when Perez got that penalty, if he could stick with him at the restart, then he could have easily got a podium. But after pitting a few laps earlier, Alonso breezed back Pi, and so did Gasly, to be fair. So he was back down to fifth. It was as if he hadn't made that good call. So it's decent points. It puts him up to fifth in the Drivers' Championship, ahead of Russell and Leclerc by 3 points. But it's nothing spectacular for me. So I've given him a 7.
Yeah, I'm happy to settle with an 8. And like I say, I've probably given him a bit of Ferrari tax with that extra point. So yeah, I'd actually be more happy if we settle with the 8. On to Lewis Hamilton in P6. Started P13, up 7 places, and was essentially following Sainz pretty much throughout the last exchanges, but just couldn't make the move stick on the Spaniard. I've gone with a 9 for Hamilton. Obviously to come back from kind of sort of a poor qualifying, and to finish like probably I think it was a couple of attempts behind Sainz. He was fortunate to actually finish P6 because Norris was closing in and nearly got him on in the final. You're giving me this face, right? Everybody won't see me. Ethan's giving me this face, but Norris finished less than a tenth behind Hamilton at the finish. you're giving me this face, but it's facts. He could have been P7 if Norris got the full force of DRS if it was open. He would have got seventh. So or he could have got P5 and got Carlos, vice versa. But yeah, I've gone with a 9. I think it was a very, very good Hamilton performance. Unfortunate not to obviously overtake Carlos Sainz and try and push for a higher place in the order, but a P6 is good nevertheless.
Yeah, I gave him a 9 out of 10 as well. And I think on another day, he could have finished second, really. If the luck went for him rather than against him this weekend. The one thing I'll say about, Norris finished very close. I think he jumped him around that last corner, was almost got him on the line. But if DRS had been active, at worst, Hamilton finishes fifth. Maybe he closes in to within 5 seconds of Perez. Maybe he overtakes Gasly and takes the third place, which would have been sensational. But he was knocked out in Q2, which wasn't his fault. Then he was the only driver not to start on the softs, so he was already on the back foot with less grip on the mediums. Why Mercedes waited so long to pit either one of their drivers is beyond me. It was such a clear call, in my opinion, that the track was horrendous. And the drivers were losing 15 seconds a lap, the ones that stuck on the slicks, compared to those that pit for the inters, which is unbelievable. And then he was around about P16, I think, and about 20 seconds behind Norris, who was in front of him, actually, by the time he pit for inters. And yet he's finished sixth. He's recovered fantastically, made some great overtakes, overtook Norris as well, which I think was a kind of overlooked a little bit from two cars and two drivers who are very similarly paced this season, or the last few races at least. And I thought it was a brilliant recovery drive. And if it wasn't for him being frustrated by Sainz at the end, it could have been even better and maybe even a podium after the restart.
On to another man that I kind of had to make some sort of comeback after the rainy shower chaos was Lando Norris in P7. Started P2, kind of fell down 5 places from the starting position to finish P7. I gave him an 8 out of 10. A very good performance in qualifying to put it on the front row, but obviously didn't make the gamble early enough to go onto the inters. And I think I'm not 100% sure whether he stuck it out for a few laps on the softs. It's giving me Russia 21. Yeah, Russia 21. Those type of vibes where it was very stubborn. Didn't want to get on the wet tires and kind of fumbled the bag there. So yeah, an 8 out of 10, good performance. And it just keeps the momentum going for McLaren because they've built a hell of a lot of ahead of steam ahead of them heading into the second half of the season. So yeah, an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, completely agree. I think he pitted maybe 1 or 2 laps after Verstappen did, because I know he was fighting with Russell for the lead. Which would the effective lead at that point, it wasn't going to be for first, given how much slower they were. But yeah, he recovered well, made some nice overtakes, got held up a little bit by Sonoda, but he finished 7th, good points, and he continues his point scoring streak, which I think at this point is 5 races long, going back to Canada, which was actually before they got the upgrade. So continuing the good performances, another 8 out of 10 for Lando Norris.
On to Alex Albon, qualified P4, finished the race in P8, dropping 4 positions. This guy, I mean, he just stuck it out the whole way. Didn't pit from the soft tyres, stuck it out, and then obviously was it a 1 stop before the rain started to pour. The new tyre whisperer, bun Sergio Perez, bun Fernando Alonso. This guy's the new tyre whisperer. Obviously, making the softs last as long as he did, and then having to pit and then the red flag, etc. But a 9 out of 10 from me for Alex Albon. It is simply fantastic.
Yeah, completely agree. Another 9 out of 10. Another one we actually agree on. We know how good he is at managing those tyres. Think back to Australia last year, where he completed all but 1 lap on the same set of tyres. it was sensational, really. He'd done what the others that stayed out failed to do, which was to stick by it. He stuck by the softs. He continued to go on that tyre, even though he had that short-term pain. He ended up getting another good point-scoring finish on a track which Williams shouldn't be good at. Williams shouldn't be good at Zandvoort. He qualified fourth and finished eighth, another 4 points. He's really standing out, isn't he? He's showing how sensational of a driver he is, and it's just another good performance to add to the collection this season.
On to the penultimate points finisher in Oscar Piastri, qualifying P8, finishing P9. I've given Oscar a 7.5 out of 10. I don't think I could have given him more than Lando Norris, and I think that is very fair. But he was another driver that kind of had to recover from early exchanges and make his way to the points, which he did. Got himself 2 points. And yeah, it's another. I think it's another decent points haul for McLaren in general. And Oscar Piastri, he won't necessarily be happy with the amount of points he's got, but it's points nevertheless, and it's another points finish to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, exactly that. I gave him a 7 out of 10, so slightly lower. But a good recovery drive, one of the more entertaining recovery drives, because he pulled off some great overtakes, and it was very fun to watch. But yeah, another solid performance from Oscar. More points under his belt.
On to our final points finisher in Esteban Ocon. Started P17, qualified at P17 and finished the race in P10, making up 7 positions. Another recovery drive similar to Gasly, the likes of Hamilton. This guy made up a numerous amount of places. I couldn't give him the heights that I gave Lewis Hamilton, and Pierre Gasly, of course, which got a 9 and a 10 respectively from me. But I gave him an 8.5 out of 10. I think once again, he just a poor qualifying, but a very good race. And Alpine kind of proved that maybe wet weather racing is kind of in their repertoire, and they kind of need to show how good they are in the wet and capitalize as much as possible, because we saw it with Esteban Ocon in Monaco, where he finished on the podium, and we've seen it last weekend with Pierre Gasly when he finished on the podium. I think wet weather racing suits Alpine a lot.
Yeah, it's like we said in the preview, they've got 2 very good drivers there, and they need to actually give them the machinery to be able to put in the performances like this. Esteban Ocon obviously starting far back and recovers for points, and we've already covered Gasly and what a sensational job he done. But if you give these good drivers the tools to put in these sorts of performances, they will do it. They're good enough drivers. They're both highly regarded drivers, and there's a reason why. 7 out of 10 for me.
Only a 7?
Yeah, he did qualify badly. He did qualify quite low. That's part of my thinking. And he did finish 10th. I know he did get a point, but that was a little bit through luck if you think about Russell having to pit with a puncture towards the end. So he kind of inherited a point a little bit through good fortune.
Yeah, we'll no doubt talk about George Russell later on, and be sure to have a shock on your hands, Ethan, because I've not rated Russell that highly. Moving on to Lance Stroll, P11, 6 out of 10 for me. Let's move on. Very anonymous. Obviously, you're giving me another face. It's the synonymous Ethan Evans face, the shock on your face. But he qualified P11, finished P11. I don't think if he was to drop a couple of places, yeah, okay, maybe I'd give him maybe like a 5 or a 4. But it's another average Lance Stroll performance. It's mediocre. So 6 out of 10 for me.
Safe to say I haven't agreed, and I don't think this is me being biased. I think it's actually me being a little bit nice. I gave Lance Stroll 4 out of 10. If we break it down, he was one of the drivers that pit for Inters, yet if you looked at about lap 5, lap 6, all of the drivers on Inters were in like that top 13, 14 places. All of the drivers that stuck on softs were in the bottom 6 or 7 places, except for Lance Stroll. He pitted for Inters and he was running 19th. He was running right at the back for the majority of the race. despite being on insist, whilst his teammate is only a few seconds off the Red Bulls. Compare the two. One's done a sensational job, maximised their performance. The other's left so much on the table. It's just, there's a reason why he's considering retirement. I think it's because he's been absolutely shown up by Fernando Alonso and realises he doesn't actually have what it takes, and he's going to retire now before he's basically forced out. That's why I think there's reports of him retiring from F1 to pursue a career in tennis, of all things. But yeah, he just wasn't very good, was he? He was one of two drivers that's finished where they started. The other one won the bloody race. It's just not a good performance, is it? He's got shown up again. His teammates standing there on the podium in second place whilst he's outside the points. Can we really be giving him decent grades for that?
Okay, I'm happy to drop my rating to a 5 out of 10. So we've got a 4.5 out of 10. You've swayed me. Because the thing is, I looked at as soon as you were debating your case, I looked at the next rating and the next driver, which is Nico Hulkenberg, who started 15th and made up 3 places. Making up places should warrant an extra bonus point per se. And before I changed my rating for Stroll down to a 5, I had him down as a 6, of course, and I only had Hulkenberg 0.5 ahead. So I think it is viable that Nico Hulkenberg has a 6.5 out of 10, and Lance Stroll has a 5 out of 10. So yeah, Nico Hulkenberg, next driver on my list, 6.5 out of 10 for me.
Do love it when the persuasion works. I gave Hulkenberg 6 out of 10. Again, I thought it was a decent performance. He was one of those that stayed out on the slicks, but obviously didn't work, so he soon pitted. But a few laps too late. He was running towards the back of the field. However, when it went to dry, he started to make up some positions. He got back into a respectable position, and he ended up finishing 12th. So you can't really fault him too much. He's had a decent little drive there, which has gone a little bit under the radar. So 6 out of 10, decent drive, so a decent grade.
Time for debutant Liam Lawson's rating. Is he a 22nd driver on my driver ratings? Imagine if he has a better average rating than Nick De Vries. Watch him do it, because I've given him a 7 out of 10 from 20th to 13th, making up 7 places. He's already got a higher average rating than Nick De Vries, so there you go. But yeah, 7 out of 10 for me. It's a very, very good drive to say that it's your first ever race in Formula One, and you're making a pass on the likes of Leclerc and other drivers. Yeah, 7 out of 10 from me. Very, very good, and I'll be happy to see him if he continues at Monza.
Yep, 7 out of 10 as well. Is Liam Lawson the GOAT? He's ahead of Ricciardo, Sonoda, and De Vries. He's the highest rated AlphaTauri driver on our 1 to 10. He's actually joint 6th now. No, it was a bit of a baptism of fire, wasn't it? Really. He was put into probably one of the worst scenarios imaginable, in some of the worst conditions that just came on in an instant. And yet he managed it all, and he wasn't finished. He didn't finish last. He wasn't sort of 20 seconds off the pace. He finished a respectable 13th and ahead of his teammate as well, which is shocking, really. But great performance from Lawson.
On to our 2 resident Scandinavians in Kevin Magnussen and Valtteri Bottas, both making up 4 places from where they started. Obviously, Kevin Magnussen was a pit lane start, but I've got him down as from his qualifying position before his gearbox change, so he's technically made six places. With Bottas making I think 3, because he started P18 due to Kevin Magnussen's grid drop. So both making places, but I've settled with both of them having an okay race and average for me. 5.5 out of 10 for both of them. I think it wasn't anything spectacular, but yeah, I've settled with that rating for the 2 of them, I think.
I got to disagree slightly with Kevin Magnussen. Started from the pit lane. He gambled early on. He had nothing to lose. Pit was right up there in the points. I think that was at the time of the first safety car, I believe. I think he was up in like 6th or 7th. But obviously the Haas pace fell away as you'd expect because they don't have any pace. So he dropped back a little bit, finished behind his teammate, but I thought it was a decent performance. I gave him a 7 out of 10. And then for Bottas, he was quite anonymous. Almost went into his teammate who was in the barrier, but was well beaten by his teammate on track up until that point. So I gave him a 5 out of 10. So 2 slightly different grades for me then. But yeah, decent performances from both of them. And I think Kevin Magnussen has actually given that new contract and actually showed, a little bit of racecraft in this race. I thought he drove quite well.
As Neil Warnock would say, and I'll do it. You got to die for P14. And Kevin Magnussen, I think he did that. On to Yuki Tsunoda, who once again penalty galore. So 3-place grid drop for impeding Lewis Hamilton. And then another penalty at the end of a race, which dropped him down to P16. For me, very, very average race. 5 out of 10 for Yuki Tsunoda. I think once again, he's been shown up by his rookie teammate. And Liam Lawson has tremendously taken that into his stride, and he's kind of shown Yuki Tsunoda. And I think Yuki Sonoda kind of got complacent a little bit, especially with Daniel Ricciardo out of the picture. He's shown a little bit of sign of complacency, got himself a grid drop and got himself a penalty at the end of the race. And we saw what happened. P16, 5 out of 10 for me.
I gave him a 6 out of 10, so not much better. So we'll compromise in the middle there. But it was an okay performance. He was running quite well, actually, but for some reason didn't decide to pit for a second set of softs, which was absolutely baffling. He was in a good position. I think he was holding up Norris, Hamilton and Piastri. So he was holding up a train of much quicker cars. But then, the McLarens and Hamilton both all pit, and AlphaTauri decided to keep him out, which was baffling. Because, maybe there's a small chance he could get points, but he was hung out to dry completely. Ended up finishing much further back. So not completely his fault, but maybe he could have overruled his team and said, no, I need to pit.
Final race finisher, George Russell, started P3, finishing P17, losing 14 places in the process, the most, I believe, out of any driver last weekend. Okay, maybe not through his own fault, but he did go off the track and lose his front wing. And yeah, kind of hampered his race a little bit from there. I was going to go for a harsh rating, but I kind of slapped myself in the face and was just there like, he did stick it out on the softs, and then kind of made his way through the field, which I commend very, very well. But then obviously that mistake kind of dropped him down a little bit. To begin with, I'll point it out. To begin with, I was going to give him a 3 out of 10. I was going to be like, yeah, to begin with, okay? To begin with, I was going to give him a 3 out of 10 because I felt that the mistake that he made kind of cost him points. And yeah, he threw his recovery drive in the bin. But I've gone too high. I've gone with a 5. I think the race that he had, brilliant. But I think just the last couple of laps before the end kind of unraveled his race, and put it in the bin essentially. He should have even retired at that point, thinking about it. So yeah, I've gone with a 5 out of 10. I think very, very good race up to the last couple of laps where he just kind of threw his race in the bin. 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I went for an 8 out of 10. I thought it was a fantastic recovery drive. So let me break it down. As we said, what were Mercedes thinking?
Right, hold that thought.
Yeah, no.
Hold the thought.
I'm surprised you went that low, even with a 5.
Hold that thought. So you're commanding his overall race, but the man threw it in the bin and didn't secure any points.
Let me break it down, right? So he was hung out to dry by Mercedes along with Hamilton, didn't pit for some whatever reason. He pit after Hamilton as well. He was running in 19th after he came out of the pits. So went on to the inters. When it started to dry up, he went on to the hards, was the only driver to go on the hards in that entire race, and went to the end, or was going to go to the end of the race until the rain came back down. But he recovered so well from that point. He got himself up to, I think, as high as 6th, which was sensational. Was holding up the drivers behind. Obviously, some of them got through because they were on new softs, like Norris and Hamilton. They got past. Hamilton was let past as well, by the way. And then the rain started falling down. So he was at the restart after the red flag. He was in 7th, I think. He was around about Norris. I think he was just behind. So maybe actually he was 8th. He has the smallest of contacts battling with Norris, the tiniest of contact. If you watch that onboard replay, there is nothing to it. And he gets a puncture because of it. It could have easily been Norris that got that puncture. It could have easily been neither one of them. They could have both been out. It was so unfortunate for Russell to have that damage and which ruined his race, which is why he finished so far down. But he almost finished 7th place. He was quicker than Norris. He actually overtook Norris, but obviously Norris got back past, and then they were battling side by side into that second DRS zone, the really short one, when they had the smallest of contacts, and which ruined Russell's race. But he qualified up in 3rd. He was on course for a podium. Mercedes messed up his strategy, gambled with the hards, made it work, and then almost capitalized on it and got some decent points from where he was on lap 4. So that is why I went for an 8 out of 10. I thought he was so unlucky, but yet he really stood out, and I really thought he put in a great performance.
A key word that you were saying there throughout that whole monologue was almost. And if buts and maybes, no absolutes, no points, out the points, and plumb last, race in the bin, race ruiner for me. But onto our retirees from the race: Guan Yu Zhou, Charles Leclerc, and Logan Sargeant. Guan Yu Zhou I've rated very highly. The man was up in the points, and he was doing a tremendous job until obviously he crashed out. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, obviously got a bit of front wing damage. I believe it was when he had contact with Oscar Piastri, and then floor damage kind of just compiled that his misery. So he was relatively poor throughout that weekend. And then Logan Sargeant, a very good qualifying, but just gone too early out the race to kind of say. So for Guan Yu Zhou, I've gone with a 7. I think to say that Alfa Romeo was running in the points at one point. 7th for me, especially from after qualifying 16th. Charles Leclerc, I've gone with a 3. I've gone with a 3 because it was just a simply poor weekend for Charles Leclerc, not on the level of Carlos Sainz, just very, very poor. And then for Logan Sargeant, I've gone with a 5 out of 10. Qualifying very well, but just for race just wasn't as long as he'd expected. So yeah, those 3 ratings: 7 out of 10 for Guan Yu Zhou, 3 out of 10 for Charles Leclerc, and 5 out of 10 for Logan Sargeant.
I agree with you with Guan Yu Zhou. He was running up in 2nd at one point. I thought he was fantastic. Logan Sargeant, I gave a 3 just because he did crash twice, and they were unforced errors. It wasn't battling wheel to wheel. Charles Leclerc, a 1 out of 10. If you want to knock Russell down, almost, he crashed twice. He crashed in qualifying, could have been sort of 4th or 5th, but no, he crashed. And then in the race, he was running well, and then he crashed again. He recovered well after being held up at his pit stop, which was the right call to pit on lap 1. But, he crashed, he ruined his own race. So 1 out of 10.
Yeah, but so did George. George crashed and ruined his own race.
But you gave Russell a very harsh rating, so
yeah, okay. If you want to play devil's advocate, we can do. So 2 out of 10 overall for Charles Leclerc. I'm happy with that one, to be fair.
I am merely using your own logic against you.
I love it.
All I'm
I
doing.
love it.
That's all I'm doing.
That rounds off our driver ratings. Let's look through our predictions from last weekend. So for qualifying, I went with a Verstappen pole position, which inevitably happened. I went with Charles Leclerc in second, which didn't happen. I went with Perez in third, which didn't happen as well, as Russell qualified in third. Hamilton, for me, was going to come fourth, but it was actually Alexander Albon and Carlos Sainz. But I picked the wrong Spaniard, as it was Fernando Alonso in fifth. Ethan, surely you did a little bit better than I did.
No, I got my standard 2 out of 10 for my predictions. So obviously Verstappen to qualify in pole. I had Leclerc second, Hamilton third, Perez fourth, and Sainz fifth. So I got the wrong Mercedes up in third, and obviously Norris and Alonso were in the top 5, who I didn't have, and then no one could see Alex Albon getting fourth, could they? And then for the race, Verstappen win, gave me my second point, my standard point. I did have Perez as second, which, you know, he was very almost second if he didn't aquaplane and have that damage. Hamilton third, Leclerc fourth, and Alonso fifth. So not the best weekend for me. So I only got the 2 out of 10.
Similarly to me, the race was the same for me. I got my usual Verstappen point. And I predicted Perez, Leclerc, Hamilton, Norris to finish that order, but it was actually Alonso, Gasly, Perez, Sainz. So for me, it was a poor weekend once again in predictions. But I think you're expecting that nowadays. You're not expecting me to have a good weekend in predictions. How does your star predictions go though? I know I didn't get my Bottas DNF, but I did manage to get my Albon top 10. And if I remember rightly, you had a certain man in Q3 as well.
I did. I had Nico Hulkenberg, so not to be on that one. But yeah, a bit of a mixed bag because I did have a safety car or a virtual safety car at some point in the race. And obviously there was a safety car and then a red flag later. So I'll take 50% of my star predictions being right.
On to this weekend's race, which is at the Temple of Speed, Monza, Italy. What are we expecting from this race? Obviously, a lot of speed, as it is the Temple of Speed, flat out for large periods of a lap. I think with the speeds of these cars, you're expecting probably a Red Bull win once again.
Yeah. So what do you want? Do you want my qualifying or my star predictions first?
We'll go with your star predictions first.
Star predictions. All right. I've gone for Albon to finish 6th or higher. I think the Williams is fantastic. Albon is unbelievable. Nick De Vries finished 9th in a Williams. And we all know how that turned out when he came into Formula One, where he thought he was the next Alex Albon. So, put Alex Albon in that car. I think he's going to do an unbelievable job. And I think 6th is being a little bit pessimistic, actually. I think he could be on for a podium. And then my second star prediction is Liam Lawson to once again beat Yuki Tsunoda. I think he's done a very good job. And I think now he's got used to that car a little bit more, maybe has a little bit more confidence, particularly in qualifying. I think you could see a good performance from him.
So for my 2-star predictions, I've labelled it as Ferrari disaster hyphen a DNF. I don't know whether it'll be Leclerc or Sainz, but from my predictions, which you'll hear later, it is the Spaniard. I think that for a second race running, I think Ferrari are going to have issues early on, and they're going to retire one of the cars. And I've gone with a Lando Norris podium. I think he's back to sort of where he belongs. Obviously qualified P2 in Zandvoort, couldn't turn it around into a podium, but I think at the Temple of Speed, McLaren will show their race pace and show what they can really do in such a high speed circuit. But onto our qualifying predictions, I've gone with a Red Bull 1-2, actually. I've gone with Verstappen in first and Perez in second, with Norris in third, Leclerc in fourth, and Sainz in fifth.
You know what? I thought I was being a little bit original, being a little bit, crafty, putting Sergio Perez in second. But no. So I've also gone for Red Bull 1-2 in qualifying. Then I went for third and fourth. I went for Alonso and Hamilton. The two rivals clashing again, but then start on the second row. And I also went for Carlos Sainz in fifth.
And for the race, I've gone with. I don't know whether this will come as a shock. It probably will, because of the pace of the Red Bull. But I've gone with Verstappen to get the win. Of course, I've gone with Norris to finish second. I've actually gone with Leclerc to finish third. I might be a lunatic after the race we've just had, but I've gone. I think the Tifosi will hype Leclerc up, and I'm hoping that he finishes highly. I've gone with Perez in fourth, and I've gone Hamilton fifth. Yeah, you're likely to see that that Sainz isn't on the list, because he's the one that I think will DNF this weekend.
I was going to say, how much of a disaster is it if one of them finishes on the podium? I went for a Red Bull 1-2.
It's still bad.
Yeah, maybe. I've gone for a Red Bull 1-2. I think if they're starting on the front row, nobody's catching them. Even though we've seen Perez is vulnerable, so I don't see anybody beating them if they're both right at the front of the grid. Hamilton to get back on the podium after a few races away from it. I think he'll finish in third. Alonso fourth, and Norris fifth.
And that rounds off the episode 28 of season 3 of On the Grid podcast. Thank you, Ethan, for joining me once again this week. We'll be back next week reviewing the Italian Grand Prix and having a bit of a relax ahead of the Singapore Grand Prix in 3 weeks' time. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.